My name's Lauren Lindstrom. I'm a professor and also dean of the School of Education at UC Davis. And unlike my earlier colleagues, I'm going to talk more about the transition at the end of special education in terms of moving from high school into adulthood. That is the area that I've been studying really since about the early 1990s. I've been either developing programs for high school age students or tracking longitudinal outcomes and really trying to understand what predicts different kinds of outcomes over time after we invest in both early education and the typically 12 years often of special education. What happens next? So why does this matter? It matters for a couple reasons. First of all, it's part of special education policy. Most of you know that back in 1990, we had the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act passed. And for the first time, that legislation talked about the purpose of special education being thinking about preparation for adulthood. So in addition to teaching all these core academic skills and other skills, social skills, we need to think about what happens next. How do we prepare students? So beginning at age 16, every student with a disability needs to have a transition plan, some transition services in their individual IEP. Some school districts start as early as 14, and that's actually best practice, but at 16, it's mandated. So that's been going on since 1990, so almost 30 years we've had transition services. However, what we know is that our students with disabilities still lag behind their non-disabled peers. Kids with disabilities, and these are federal data, less likely to graduate from high school. We see differential outcomes in post-secondary education, so kids with disabilities are more likely to go to a community college or vocational program, less likely to go to a university, and oftentimes that ends up in very low wage, part-time poverty level, essentially. And so we're concerned about that nationally. We see that same pattern in California in terms of graduation rates being lower and also the post-school outcomes being poorer across the board. So what we're going to talk about briefly, Carolyn and I, is we also, since 1990, have been doing a lot of research on this, trying to understand transition services and transition outcomes. And there's a number of predictors that we know will improve those outcomes. They have been verified over time by numbers of different studies. And so the four predictors we'll talk about briefly are family involvement, work-based learning, inclusion, and interagency collaboration. So I'll start us off by talking a little bit about family involvement. We know this is critical for all kids in terms of meeting important education benchmarks, but it's especially critical for students with disabilities. We know that if families are involved in education, that students are more likely to complete high school, go on to some kind of employment or post-secondary education. Parents can be role models, they can be advocates, and they're lifelong investors in their young people. They want to see what's best for them. We also have some data that shows if parents have high expectations for their children with disabilities, that also predicts better outcomes. So if a parent believes that their student with Down syndrome is going to get a job, we see that that student is much more likely to be employed as an adult. So expectations as well as behavior and involvement both matter. So what can we do about parent involvement? We have a couple recommendations. We really think it's important to partner with families. Again, families have a wealth of knowledge about their own children that can be matched up with what schools know. That's more formal. Parents have the informal knowledge. They really need to work together in transition planning. Parents need information about resources and need information about options. Oftentimes when I talk to parents, they're frustrated because they just don't know what's next. They're in a school system and then there's a wealth of complicated options once you reach the post-school system. So there, we provide you with one resource there for parent training and information centers that we think is a good option to share. The next piece I want to mention in terms of an important predictor of increased outcomes is work-based learning or some type of employment. We know from studies over the last 20 years that if a young person with a disability has the opportunity to work while they're in high school, they are much more likely to be employed as an adult. And that could be through a range of different kinds of work experiences. We know that work teaches you about work, but it also teaches you about careers. And so young people can build skills and get more exposed to a broader range of careers, which then could potentially lead to higher wage employment options. There are also a number of different opportunities to gain work experience. It doesn't have to just be a paid job. Students can do job shadowing, they can do service learning, they can be involved at their school in some kind of a school-based business or other kinds of formal education. Last thing I want to mention about employment is just some recommendations. That picture, by the way, is a school-based business where the students are learning how to grow vegetables, and then they harvest them and sell them at a local farmer's market. So they're getting experience in lots of different kinds of job skills through that school-based business. So we think it's important for high schools to encourage career exploration. We want students to have opportunities to try different kinds of careers, and finally to be engaged in career and college readiness opportunities that are available for all young people. So I'm going to move over now to Carolyn, my co-author, who's going to talk about two other predictors of positive post-school outcomes.